Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Matt Zemek along with Ethan Inman and Crashlet Collier. Hope you had a good off week. USC moves up into the top 25 of the AP poll. So, sitting on the couch, USC is able to move up in the national rankings. But, that doesn't matter too much. What really matters is beating Nebraska and validating that AP national ranking and staying in the playoff hunt, staying in the Big Ten hunt, trying to make something of this season. Ethan said a lot about that after the Notre Dame loss. So home stretch, crunch time, it's time for this team to really prove itself. So we start off with, we watched Nebraska against Northwestern, much as, when we had the previous off week a few weeks ago, Michigan was playing Wisconsin. So we all sat down to watch Michigan before USC played the Wolverines. So this was our chance to get a scouting report. So we'll get it over to Crash. But first, Ethan, and folks, like, Ethan's the Nebraska whisperer here. Like, he's our Nebraska insider, has some Nebraska connections. So we start with Ethan with your impressions of what you saw about Nebraska against Northwestern as the prelude to this week's game against USC.
Yeah, so it was a lot of kind of typical Nebraska for how they've been this year. They let Caleb Komolafe run all over them. I think he had like 125 yards, even though he'd only had one other 100-yard rushing game in his career. So, not a guy who you expect to come out and have, 125 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he did because the Nebraska run defense isn't very good. But, they locked down Preston Stone, and Preston Stone isn't a very good quarterback. He's definitely one of the worst, if not the worst in the Big Ten. So it's not, insanely amazing to lock down Preston Stone, but they did a good job. They took advantage of the opportunities when it came their way. They picked off a couple passes. So, Nebraska's defense is ranked really highly in a lot of categories when it comes to pass defense, which I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the rest of the show and, how legitimate that is and all that stuff. And then, a couple of exciting special teams plays. They returned a kickoff for a touchdown. They had a punt return touchdown called back, I believe. And that's also very typical for Nebraska. Their special teams has been very strong. Their kicker has nearly the same numbers as Ryan Sayuri. He actually missed a field goal on Saturday, which kind of, made him have 2 misses on the season. He only had 1 miss going in. And hadn't missed an extra point. So it was very, very similar numbers to Ryan Sayuri, but now he has 2 misses. So Sayuri has a little bit on him there. But overall, typical of Nebraska. I think, them being able to pull out this game shows a little bit of the program's growth. Like in past years, they would not have pulled it out. And, they would have lost by 1 point in some heartbreaking way. That was kind of the Scott Frost way at Nebraska. But it's still, Northwestern is not a better team than Nebraska on paper. That's a team that they should be beating by more than a touchdown. So still a long way to go for them also. But, that's kind of my impressions in all 3 phases.
So, Matt, the big impression that I took away from this game was just, after seeing everything on it, was just really just how Nebraska looks like a solid team overall. I mean, they're 6-2, and I think you have to give them some credit for what they've done this year, especially considering Matt Rule's name is kind of now in that area to, he's in the talks for the Penn State job. So, that's kind of, if your coach is being talked about for a job that's, perceived to be up on a step up for you career-wise, you're probably doing a good job for the most part. So you got to give them credit for that. Obviously, you look at just how they've been this year. They have that bad loss to Minnesota. They played Michigan pretty respectably. But with this game, what stood out to me was just the fact they were up 2 touchdowns, and then they let the Wildcats back in it, and then ultimately have to, have that final drive, which you got to give a lot of credit to Dylan Raiola that he was able to, stay calm and put that together and really just, take a lot of time off the clock and ultimately get the Huskers down the field and into the end zone. But I think that just shows that Nebraska, I think, can be really good, but they also can, might be a little streaky and inconsistent at times. And I think that is something that USC will need to take advantage of this weekend.
Crash,
Did you not hear anything?
cut off. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I heard it on my end.
Go ahead and resume.
Okay, so apologies for the technical difficulties, but what I was saying about Nebraska is they look like overall they've been a good team this year. I mean, you got to give credit to Matt Rule for just what he's done there. And I mean, considering he's in talks for the Penn State job, that generally shows you're doing a good job as a coach. But what stood out to me about this team is they've played pretty well. Yes, they have the bad loss to Minnesota. They've also played Michigan pretty close. Could have won that one. But what stood out to me about this Northwestern game was that they were up 2 touchdowns and ultimately let Northwestern in, and then ultimately got the touchdown and ultimately allowed the Wildcats to get that 2-point conversion to tie it up at 21-all. But then you got to give a lot of credit to Dylan Raiola for leading that offense down the field and into the end zone, taking a lot of time off that clock and ultimately helping the Huskers get the win. So it's still impressive to see that, but still I think because of how inconsistent and streaky they can look at times, USC is going to need to take advantage of that if they want to win this weekend.
A little perspective on this game. A year ago, there were a number of milestones or a number of significant plot points when Nebraska came to the Los Angeles Coliseum to play USC. One, that was Jaden Maiava's first start. So, he's seen Nebraska before. It's not going to be his first rodeo against the Huskers. That's one of a select few Big Ten teams that he's already seen. But the other one, and this is the one I'm particularly interested in, is that this was Nebraska's first game with Dana Holgorsen on the coaching staff. He came in midway through last season and, to fix up Dylan Raiola. And so he was there on the sideline in the Coliseum against USC. So, Holgorsen and Raiola have both gone up against Danton Lynn. So they're also familiar with that particular chess match. But I mentioned Holgorsen also for this reason, not just because he was coaching against USC last year. It's that, Holgorsen is, a quarterback developer. He had Geno Smith at West Virginia way back when. West Virginia scored 70, I think, on Dabo and Clemson in that Orange Bowl 13 years ago or so. And so, Holgorsen as a head coach at West Virginia wasn't great, but his offenses would go up against Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma, and they'd get into those, 55-48 Big 12, old-fashioned shootouts. Dana Holgorsen was supposed to turn Dylan Raiola into a great quarterback. And here we are roughly a year later, after that first meeting last November of 2024 against USC, and I'm not seeing it. This was certainly not the return on investment that Nebraska fans would have hoped for with Dana Holgorsen being brought in as the big gun to tutor and develop Dylan Raiola. Nebraska, beating Northwestern at home barely on a day when, as Ethan outlined, Preston Stone, Northwestern's quarterback, did not play well, committed some crucial turnovers. If Nebraska's good, if Nebraska is Nebraska, that should be 35-10, 35-7, but it was instead a squeaker. If Nebraska's really rolling, if that program's really on the right track, you should absolutely hammer Northwestern when the Northwestern quarterback isn't playing well. Now, the problem for Nebraska in previous seasons was it would allow opposing quarterbacks to play well. But this time it didn't happen, and yet it was still a squeaker. So, that's my entry point with this game against USC, that if Nebraska is barely better than Northwestern at home with Northwestern's quarterback playing poorly, Jaden Maiava just has to play a B-level game. Doesn't have to be a hero. Doesn't have to be 2022 Caleb Williams. Just don't F up. Right? Don't commit the big mistake. Just get the ball where it's supposed to go, distribute the pigskin, to receivers when they're open, check it down if the pass rush is coming, if the black shirts are getting after you. Just play a solid, workmanlike game manager type of game. And if Nebraska couldn't really distance itself from a bad Preston Stone, Jaden Mayava just playing a solid blue-collar lunch pail game. Nothing's flashy, nothing spectacular, but just cutting out the mistakes, cutting out the weird stuff, which doesn't usually happen, but usually he's good for one or two really bad mistakes per game. Just eliminate those 2 mistakes, USC should be fine. But that word "should" is doing a lot of always happen, especially on the road for Lincoln Riley and USC. So let's go into more plot points on this game, Ethan. And we're going to look at some of your Trojans Wire articles in a bit. We'll get to that in a little bit, where we're going to kind of let people gather around this YouTube campfire here at the Voice of College Football for a little bit longer. Then we'll break out the s'mores and the graham crackers and the marshmallows. But just in terms of your main plot points, the main matchups, the main storylines that you have assembled for this game, or Ethan, and then we'll go over to Crash.
Yeah, so it's definitely Dylan Raiola versus the USC defensive line, because Dylan Raiola is very bad under pressure, and specifically when he has multiple players putting pressure on him at the same time. There's been plenty of times throughout the year where I've seen one guy get in the backfield and Raiola is able to evade him or break the sack or whatever. But if the pocket is collapsing on him, he turtles up every time. He is not good at getting rid of the ball quickly enough to avoid the sack. He's not good at getting out of the pocket when there's I think it must be a mental thing. When there's multiple players that he has to figure out how to evade, he just can't do it. So I think the defensive line needs to get home on Raiola and make him really uncomfortable. And, once you do that, he's not very effective. And in the games that he's been the worst, like Minnesota, it's been because Minnesota sacked him 9 times. So and the Nebraska offensive line is not very good either. It's not just a Raiola thing. It's also because the offensive line is not good in pass protection at all. But that's the main thing for USC's defense, I think, is really getting home on him and really selling out. And I think, it's USC scheme-wise is going to be tempted to do what they've been doing all year, which is kind of play this really soft pass coverage, because Raiola does have a big arm. He's still very talented and can uncork long passing touchdowns every once in a while. And so, they're going to be tempted to do the same thing they did against CJ Carr, which is play this really soft pass coverage and, take away the long pass and just kind of eliminate that part of Raiola's game. But how CJ Carr played last week is how Dylan Raiola plays every week. He makes 1 or 2 really crucial, really dumb mistakes because his field vision is not great. And he also just can't stand up against the defensive line. So that's a really key matchup. The defensive line needs to get home. And, whether that means blitzing a lot of guys, stacking the tackle box, playing press coverage, whatever it means, USC needs to really get home on Dylan Raiola. And that'll be kind of the key to stopping that aspect of the Nebraska offense. And then, it's USC against the run as well. I think all the key matchups for USC are defense versus Nebraska's offense mostly. Because Emmett Johnson he's not super physical, but he is really elusive and great at breaking tackles and making double moves that make would-be tacklers miss. So USC needs to stay really disciplined in terms of trying to bring him down and not bite on those double moves and let him kind of just skate around them. So that'll be really crucial as well. Offensively, USC just needs to establish the run, and then I think that they'll be okay. Kind of like you said, I think Mayava can play a B-level game, and USC can still win. The best quarterback Nebraska's played is probably Malik Washington of Maryland, who is maybe a middle-tier Big Ten quarterback. They have great numbers in pass defense, but it's not like they've been playing anybody all that great. They did really well against Brendan Sorsby in week 1, of Cincinnati, and he's gone on to have a really good season. So that's probably the best quarterback they've played, but it was also week 1. So it's kind of at a neutral site in Kansas City. So it's kind of neither here nor there, in my opinion. But I think Mayava can play a B-level game, and USC just needs to establish the run. And I think that King Miller will have a good day because the Nebraska run defense, like I said, is not very good. And they let players who have never had 100 yards in their life do pretty well. And King Miller did pretty well against Michigan, and the USC offensive line held up against Michigan. So I'm pretty confident that they'll be able to do it. But, for whatever reason they can't, that'll come back to bite them.
I absolutely agree with everything Ethan's saying. I think just based on what I saw from this team, this past weekend. Just like, it's really just, obviously they're not Notre Dame, so it's not as like going to be as much of, just nothing's going to work, but definitely USC does need to come ready. Like you said, Matt, I agree that Jade Mayava doesn't need to do anything fancy, but he also can't just, just do anything stupid, pretty much, I guess is kind of how I'd look at it. Is just play a steady game. Just don't get too streaky. And I think that's just really just going to be up to really like King Miller, just run the ball and especially just, really just take advantage of just a team that isn't going to be as strong as Notre Dame. It's going to be more, if not, it'll probably, I'm going to guess, be more like that Michigan game. I mean, if not, maybe a little worse, maybe not as tough, but just really just USC just needs, just kind of play that just really just out physical a team. Just beat them just in the trenches is really what I want to see, and just really just beat them with the run game. And then also I really would like to see maybe USC utilize Jade Mayava as well in the run game too, something we haven't seen that much of late, but I think could definitely add another element, especially when you consider both Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders out.
All right. Want to highlight a comment from Green Grass. Come on, man. You guys shouldn't sweat the small stuff. Nebraska's terrible. You blow them out by 30. Hey, Green Grass, have you noticed USC under Lincoln Riley, how that kind of thing never really happens? It's 3.5 years in. When does USC go click-clack and go into a place like Nebraska and win by 30? May I remind you, Greengrass, and everyone else watching here at the Voice of College Football, USC beat Purdue by 13, and Purdue's bad. Purdue got shut out by Northwestern, okay? And Northwestern lost to Nebraska. USC beat Purdue by only 13. USC beat Michigan State, and Michigan State is dog S-H-I-T. USC beat Michigan State by only 14 and allowed 31 to the Spartans. They suck. So, USC going into Lincoln and winning by 30, that was what Pete Carroll did. And we could also say that 2016 USC team, once Sam Darnold came aboard and that machine got rolling, yeah, that team could go into an enemy lair, lay a smackdown. Like Washington made the college football playoff, the 4-team playoff in 2016. That USC team with Sam Darnold went up to Seattle and just mopped up Washington, just wiped the Huskies off the field. That was a dominant game, if you remember that one 9 years ago. That does not happen under Lincoln Riley. Now, do we all want it to happen? Of course, but it does not happen. Just that's a fact, Jack. That's the history of Lincoln Riley on the road at USC. So just want to kind of put that perspective in there as we move along with our conversation. And speaking of moving along with our conversation, so Ethan is writing for Trojans Wire. So happy to have him aboard. And he wrote some football scouting reports. Hope you got a taste of these, but if not, you can read up right now, and Ethan's going to walk you through. So, Ethan, let's start with the Nebraska offense against the USC defense, and what you're looking for and what fans can look for. Walk us through your article, starting with, as you briefly did allude to earlier, Dylan Raiola against the blitz.
Yeah, so I think that, the thing that became obvious for me upon reviewing Nebraska film is that Dylan Raiola is especially bad against the blitz. And it's not like necessarily that he throws a lot of his interceptions against the blitz. Ironically, like he throws a lot of his interceptions when he's not under pressure and he just doesn't see the DB. But he just is not very good at evading the blitz. And, whenever he's blitzed, he pretty consistently takes sacks, and, and like, it's not even necessarily like anything super complicated. It's not like he's faced super speedy pass rushers. It's just, they bully the Nebraska offensive line, and then they kind of bowl him over. So it's it should be advantage USC there, on paper, of course, and should is the key word, as we always like to say about USC on the road. But yeah, so that's kind of what I've seen from him. And then, I went on to mention in the article the Nebraska's pass protection woes, as I said. He still has talent. Like he'll probably make a couple of plays in this game that'll impress you and kind of make your jaw drop a little bit and be like, all right, like I see why he was a 5-star when he was so highly recruited. But he's also going to make some really dumb errors. Like probably throwing the ball right to Bishop Fitzgerald, who's just like sitting, waiting. It's like that's just kind of the plays that Raiola makes every once in a while, and that's what really frustrates Nebraska fans about him. His field vision's not very good. And Dana Holgorsen, he's an improvement over Nebraska's last offensive staff, but he still makes some pretty questionable play calls. Like Raiola is really good at throwing the ball on the run and like moving outside of the pocket, not necessarily when he has to improvise per se, but just on design throws where he has to move outside of the pocket and hit a receiver crossing downfield. Like those are some of his best plays on tape, but Nebraska doesn't run them all that often. The Trojans Wire ad always jumps up and scares me at the worst possible moment. But they don't run a lot of that. They make him pass in the pocket, even though, Nebraska's offensive line is bad and he cracks under pressure. So it's kind of puzzling. And then, Holgorsen also every once in a while will call one of those tight end screens behind the line of scrimmage on 4th down that just make you go, what the heck? But yeah, and then I think I went on and talk a bit about Emmett Johnson, who I brought up earlier. He's been really good for Nebraska this year. He's really elusive. And he probably will have some decent runs against this defense. The key, of course, is just not letting him have a Jeremiah Love type performance. I think that stacking the tackle box is advantageous, and blitzing and all that is advantageous, not just for stopping Raiola, but for stopping Emmett Johnson, because he's not very physical. Like he's not going to break a lot of tackles. If you can get him in the backfield, that can really limit his effectiveness. So that's kind of that's kind of what I think about him there. And then, Nebraska has a lot of great athletes. I talked about, Nyzia Hunter and the other Dane Key, Ja'Cory Barney Jr. They're all really fast, all really athletic. They have some great athletes on special teams as well. But for some reason, again, I think it would be really wise for Nebraska to do a better job of getting the ball in their playmakers' hands pretty quickly, kind of like similar to how USC runs their offense. But they make Raiola, try to pass the ball in the pocket way too much. But, if USC is kind of giving these receivers a lot of space, like 5 yards away from the line of scrimmage, like they tend to do with other teams, that could end up being really dangerous because they are really athletic and, can turn a 5-yard pass into a 60-yard touchdown. So that's something to be aware of there. Overall, I think, USC should be able to dominate Nebraska's offense on paper. This is a team where there's very clear advantages for USC just because of how weak the offensive line is and how, Raiola plays against pressure and how, the defensive line is the strength of USC's defense. But, should is the key word, like I said. And also, if we're playing scared, if we're game planning scared, if we're game planning like we're afraid Raiola is going to throw an 80-yard touchdown every play, then we're not going to do so hot. So it's all about game planning correctly and playing aggressive defense, in my opinion.
All right, so that's Ethan's scouting report for the USC defense against Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska offense. Crash, Ethan, as he always does, he laid out a large buffet table. Which food items do you want to pick from that platter and focus on in your own USC defense, Nebraska offense preview?
Well, Matt, when I go to a buffet, I do like to try everything. That said, though, I will do my best to limit myself. Sticking on that metaphor, that amazing metaphor we've been using the last couple of weeks when it comes to Ethan's reporting for Trojans Wire, which has been excellent, Ethan. I've been really enjoying your work.
Thank you.
Of course. But I think just really to just try to touch on everything. I think just really the big thing I think can be containing Dylan Raiola. I think just because it's like he's a dual threat. He's a good quarterback. He's got talent. He's just, I think, just struggled and just kind of like we were talking about earlier, has the, additions that Matt Rule's made to the offensive side of his staff really helped. Because, and there's also, I've been wondering, it was really interesting when they add Dana Holgorsen, I think, roughly around this time last year. And then right before the game, they promote him to offensive coordinator and demote Marcus Satterfield to exclusively tight ends coach. That's always got to seem like a weird thing. It seems like usually if you want someone to not be at the job, you gotta just kick them out completely. But I'm not the head coach of Nebraska, so I'll leave that decision to Matt Rule. But I think it's just really USC's got to, find a way to contain Raiola and not let him, just have a game where he can just, do what he wants, because that's what's gotten USC in trouble against quarterbacks that aren't as talented or haven't been having good games, especially in both their losses. I mean, in both cases with both CJ Carr at Notre Dame and Luke Altmaier at Illinois. So I think really this game is all about just USC needing to just really find a way to containing Raiola to make sure that he's uncomfortable, and really just, I think, just put the pressure on him early so that way he struggles, and then that way just the team's out of rhythm. Because, I mean, when you saw USC did that against Michigan, granted Justice Haynes got injured that game, but still, just when they put the pressure on Michigan early, it just made things really tough for the Wolverines, and that was ultimately why USC was able to prevail. So I think just a really strong defensive start is what I really am taking away from just everything that we've been discussing.
My point of focus in this game, it's all about the defensive line for USC. And, Jeff Rodriguez is saying, please just sell out for the run. Sell out for the run or not, whether USC loads the tackle box or not. I think the relevant point here is that CJ Carr of Notre Dame did not play well. Like, Notre Dame's passing game was not very good. Like, it did not perform well. It has talent. There's a capability to do really well, but that Notre Dame passing game was not very good against USC. You would think that in a big boy game, primetime, national television, all the chips on the table, high stakes poker, that if your opponent can't throw the ball well, that you can at least contain the run. Maybe not stop it cold, maybe not smother it, but you contain it. Like, you don't get absolutely walloped. USC got absolutely walloped. Over 300 yards rushing allowed. Can USC, if the opposing quarterback is not throwing the ball very accurately or consistently, you should be able to keep an opposing running game. And look, I'm not asking too much here. Under 150 yards. I'm not talking under 100. Just under 150, right? You're just not giving up chunk play after chunk play. You're not getting gashed on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7 repeatedly, as USC was against Notre Dame. So this is a time for USC's big uglies on the defensive side of the ball to take it personally. Like, that is the unit that absolutely has to stand tough and tall. Nebraska fans know that their offensive line got shoved around by Minnesota. So it's another comparison with Lincoln Riley and USC. If USC can't even at least come close to what Minnesota did with its defensive front against Nebraska, then what are we doing here? What is the point, right? So to me, this is a defensive line game. Guys need to get all snot-nosed and nasty and take a stand. Certainly, coming off another week off, you had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Like, if USC doesn't have steam coming out of the nostrils and the ears, something's wrong. But, I think Jeff Rodriguez and myself, we both fear, there won't be steam coming out of the nostrils and ears, and it's just going to be another ordinary performance, letting Nebraska hang around, and this game is going to be too close for comfort at the end. All right, so we did Ethan's scouting report at Trojans Wire, USC defense versus Nebraska offense. Now let's flip it the other way. Now let's go to the USC offense against the Nebraska defense. And Ethan, you can walk everyone through your other USC-Nebraska scouting report at Trojans Wire.
Yeah, so in this one, I kind of started with how I started on Nebraska's defense this past time, is that Nebraska, in the stat sheet and all that, has one of the best pass defenses in the country. They and it's because they are good in pass coverage. Like, they haven't gotten a ton of turnovers. They don't get a ton of sacks. I think they have 12. The USC's 21. They just have good. They have good guys on the back end who really lock down opposing receivers. And like I said, that's partially because they haven't really played any quarterbacks that are very good. And they've had some troubling performances, like against Minnesota when they let the Minnesota QB complete 16 to 20 passes, even though he's not very good and hasn't performed great to that point. So, there's some kind of questions, I think, lingering in Lincoln about, is this pass defense for real, or, have they kind of stuffed the stat sheet because they played against some FCS or, really low level teams at the beginning of the year. And then, they've played against bad Big Ten quarterbacks to this point. Maiyava's quite easily the best quarterback they've played so far. So I think, that'll be something interesting to monitor, but you have to give them credit where credit is due. Their secondary has really locked down their receivers. And that's led by former Trojan Sierra Wright, who is having a great year. I believe he leads the team in pass breakups, and he's a full season captain for them. So it's, kind of cool for him to kind of be able to emerge in that leadership role on that defense. And, I think most Trojan fans are probably happy for him, but so he's someone to pay a little bit extra close attention to just because, he's significant to the USC fan base. And so we'll see how he does. Sierra Wright of playing LeBron James's son in Space Jam 2 fame. Of course, he's the actor and football player. So kind of an interesting story there for him. And then, apart from that, they, like I said, they haven't faced anyone like Jaden Maiyava. Their run defense is not good at all. They let a lot of running backs who, don't typically put up big stats put up big yards and big touchdowns, have huge games like Caleb Komolafe this past week. So, establishing the run should, and again, I said should because both sides of the trenches, I'm just going to say should in relation to this game, because we all remember Illinois and how we all came on this podcast and were like, oh, Illinois' offensive line is terrible. USC should, be able to make Luke Altmaier uncomfortable and rack up all the sacks. And then, USC's offensive line should also dominate. And the offensive line was okay, but the defensive line didn't do anything like that. So, I think that also kind of speaks to why we're tentative about all this. But anyways, King Miller should be able to kind of rebound and have a great game. Hopefully Brian Jackson is healthy. That's kind of it on their defense. They're good against the pass, but it's exclusively because they're good in coverage. Maiyava should have time. They don't get home a lot. They also don't have a kind of number one guy on the defensive line. I think that, the guy who has the most sacks on the team has 2. So it's not like, they have some dominant defensive lineman who USC needs to look out for either. So, I feel good about USC's offensive line in this game. And I feel good about, the time that Maiyava is going to have and that he'll be comfortable in the pocket. And I feel good about them being able to establish the run. It'll be interesting to see, how Maiyava plays against these corners. And he's going to need to stay patient, and he's going to, like you said, Matt, need to not force anything and not make those mistakes because, they are a good secondary and they will make it tough on you. But I think that, there's still a lot of advantages that USC has. And, with all of their talent, especially, they should have the advantage on paper. But again, we use that qualifying word should.
All right. So plenty to consider from Ethan's other scouting report at Trojans Wire. Crash, from all the things that Ethan mentioned, what are you really focusing on in this particular matchup between the USC offense and the Nebraska defense this Saturday?
Matt, I think USC's really got to focus on the run game and really just try to, take advantage of Nebraska's D-line just not being as strong as like the D-line of Notre Dame. And I think even with, King Miller and Brian Jackson, I think USC is more than capable of, taking care of that. And even though obviously Nebraska's got a good secondary, I think when you have receivers like Kai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, I think that's probably, a step up. They're two of arguably the best receivers in the country. So I'd like to see how Nebraska's secondary does. So I don't think USC should be afraid to, also take advantage of the passing game too. That said, though, obviously, even if, Nebraska is keyed up on Lemon and Lane, I wouldn't be opposed to USC trying to utilize a third guy like they did with Tanu Kynes a little bit against Notre Dame. I thought that was kind of smart. I mean, it worked at times and was really, I think effective, especially because Lemon and Lane struggled because Notre Dame was really just putting most of their focus on those two guys, especially Lemon. So I think that's an opportunity there. Not saying maybe to the same extent that they kind of did, especially in that first half of the Notre Dame game, but especially just making it so that way it's like, you at least force them to have to guard a third person and try to beat them there. And then if they do move to that guy, then that does help open up Lemon and Lane. But even still, despite what I've said about the passing, I think it's really about just beating them with the run game.
I'm going to jump in real quick just because I really like this comment from Brian Jacob about Maiyava running the ball more.
I do too. Yes.
Is also not particularly good at defending running quarterbacks. Bryce Underwood really tore him up, and that was one of the reasons why Michigan won. And running the ball, not throwing the ball. I think he had like 60 passing yards, but he was able to effectively run and had a couple of decent decent runs, including a long touchdown run. So this seems like a great opportunity to work that element back into the offense because you have a defense that doesn't really defend it very well.
Yeah, my point of focus, I love that Jaden Maiava should be used more as a runner. Like Lincoln Riley's coached Baker Mayfield and especially Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams. Like you thrive, Lincoln, offensively with dual threat guys, and the dual threat is part of what makes the other components of the offense open up. So like we should definitely see that, just because like you want to take advantage of a bigger, fuller skill set than what Miller Moss had. And we all agree, Miller Moss just not being able to be a runner, a dual threat guy, limited the USC playbook, limited the parameters of what the Trojans were able to do on offense last season. So you have to be using Maiava as a run threat more, and you have to get defensive lines and linebackers on their heels for that very reason. You want to crash down, you want to rush the passer. Well, no, we're going to do a bootleg. We're going to do a keeper to the boundary or outside the tackles. That's exactly what can slow down a pass rush and make a defense second guess itself. So amen to that. The two other really big points. One is, I think this is a big time tight end game for USC. Because, if the Nebraska secondary is as good as Ethan says it is, and I trust Ethan's analysis, again, like Ethan follows Nebraska pretty closely. Like he watches Nebraska a little more closely than other non-USC college football programs. So if the Nebraska corners really are as good as advertised, and they're going to, occupy Lane and Lemon, and if Nebraska's front seven is going to, load the box and crash down against the run, then play action, tight end slipping out into the flat, or just along the seam, leaking along the seam, near the hash mark, like those kinds of plays should be repeatedly available early in the game. And if like USC can establish the tight end in this offense, then Nebraska's caught scrambling, because then Nebraska's going to think, oh, we need to account for the tight end. That's when Lemon and Lane can get open down the field, and that's when the running game can be more effective. So I see the tight ends being a really important Swiss Army knife type weapon for USC, along with Maiava and the running game. But here's the third and final point, and this is my crown jewel point for this week. It's a second game after an off week. So USC gets these 2 off weeks, and in the middle third of the season, like there were times in previous seasons when USC would get an off week either super early, like last year, before the Michigan game in the middle of September, or super late, like in the middle of November before the final rivalry games. You don't want off weeks really early or really late, because you're playing a lot of football in the middle. You need your off weeks in the middle third of the season, and this year's schedule lined up favorably for USC for that very reason. These off weeks are coming in the middle chunk of the season, so like USC should be really fresh for this 5-game home stretch in November. And because USC is really fresh, and because you're getting a second 2-week break in the middle of your season, like this means, okay, all the restraints, all the seat belts should come off. Like now we let it ride. Now we let it rip. Like there is no reason, there's no good logical reason to be constrained with the playbook. It all opens up now. You want to carry a third of your playbook into the off season? That's not going to do you any good. So this is this game, and then the Oregon game, right? Those are the 2 games in particular. You could also say UCLA, but like Oregon comes before UCLA. This game and the Oregon game, full playbook, Lincoln. Don't leave anything on the cutting room floor. Like this is where we need to see the runs with Jaden Maiava. This is where we need to see more RPOs, and we need to see just everything come flying out. And that doesn't mean, you're flinging it downfield and you're being reckless and irresponsible. It just means that, we've all gone to the dentist, and the dentist will poke and prod, with all the instruments, up here and over here. And, sometimes it might get a little gritty and aggressive and uncomfortable, but sometimes it's just kind of that light tapping. USC needs to be doing all that light tapping here, short left flat, A gap, down the right side. Like, make Nebraska account for everything, every possibility. You show this, then you hit them with that. You zig left, then you can zag right. Every play in the playbook needs to be available and ready to be dialed up in this game. Like, there's no point in holding anything back. In a September game, we've talked about this. Don't show Illinois or Michigan or Notre Dame too many of your cards against Purdue and Michigan State. You can handle those games. Save them for when it matters. Well, right now is when it matters, right? It's November. It's a road night game, national television, in prime time. Just, there can't be any more limits. And if there are limits, what does that say about Lincoln Riley's coaching of this team? Like, if Lincoln Riley is holding things back in November in a big game that means a lot to the program, then obviously that's telling everyone, I don't fully trust you with the full playbook, that there are some things that we're not ready to do. If you're not ready to do big things in November, again, what's the point? What are we doing here? What's going on? It is not in the right position. Okay, so we've chopped it up a lot. We're going to have more on this game coming back at you on the other side. But first, a word from our sponsor here at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you in 1 minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click Join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And we remind you to watch Mark Rogers' national show here at the Voice of College Football 6 nights a week, Monday through Saturday, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West. So before we go forward, a reminder, you get these nice, snappy VOCFB caps and shirts and other kinds of merch. You can look around the site, vocfb.com/shop. Of course, Ethan wearing that very stylish USC cap with the VOCFB logo. You know, the proceeds from any USC branded VOCFB piece of merchandise that supports the channel, it supports us, it supports the Voice of College Football. So if you want to support us, you know, that's one obvious way to do that. And then as we can continue with our housekeeping here at the Voice of College Football, go to our YouTube homepage for the USC channel at the Voice of College Football and join on that middle Heisman tier or that top national champion tier. You just click that join button on the homepage. You get that list of membership tiers, Heisman and national champion tiers. You get the exclusive bonus cuts, exclusive insider access to those extra segments that Ethan, Crash, and myself are producing. We're continuing to roll them out. I think we have 7 right now, and we're going to have a couple more in the can as the week goes on. So we'll have 9 at the end of October, beginning of November. Middle Heisman tier, top national champion tier for memberships on the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. It's another way to support the USC channel. And speaking of support of the USC channel, Slap Happy, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. And Slap, you are speaking for everyone. Better not suck this week. We're all fed up, and we're all going to be extremely angry if this team cannot deliver, at the very least, a win. It would be nice to get a convincing win, but I'll take a 1-point win. I'm not going to be greedy, right? Because this is Lincoln Riley's USC, and just the team has not set the bar very high in these road games. I'll take the ugly duckling 1-point win if that's what it takes to get out of Lincoln. Obviously hoping for more, but the expectations just have to be tempered with this team on the road. We've just seen it way too many times over the course of Lincoln Riley's tenure, and I think that goes to really what we should be talking about in this final segment, that on paper USC should win, and it should win with some degree of comfort. But are we confident? Are we confident that this team is going to live up to what we see on paper? Athlete by athlete, dude by dude, USC has more than Nebraska does, but is it actually going to manifest itself? And I'm not so much asking for a game prediction. It's more about just your level of trust in Lincoln Riley and the program at this point, because I think that's really kind of the conversation we should be having right now. Crash first, and then Ethan second on this particular point.
So I think with just the program in general, it's hard to gauge what I feel like where you are, because it seems like things will just start off really strong. You're thinking, oh, great, this is our year. It's going to be it. And then, in 2022, Riley's first year, that was really that was the case. Yes, they had, the 3 losses, the 2 heartbreakers to Utah, and then the collapse against Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. But that year, you can say that was a good year. You were excited about games. You felt good going into them. Yes, sure, the defense started to struggle and, became a problem. But at least you were winning games, and for the most part, you were just really, the big thing was you were walking out of the stadium with a win. But since then, it's just been you just don't know. Since kind of the second half of 2023, you just don't know what way the game is going to go. And I think for fans, it's been pretty frustrating, because it's I'm not saying you want to, I'm not saying you're not obviously you got to go earn it on the field. I'm all for that. But it's you don't always want to be showing up to games being what's going to happen? Here we go again. Just fully just having, take a bunch of anxiety medication before or whatever, you do to, brace yourself for those types of things, if that's what you do. But since kind of, the move to the Big Ten, it's just been but since then it's just been kind of just steadily declining each year. So I'm wondering, with this game, is USC there? Obviously when you go cover practices, especially in the spring, everyone's all positive. You feel good. Especially when you're covering, it's there's not much really out there in terms of footage. They didn't even have a spring game this year. There's not much really you can really analyze that can give you much of an indicator of where the team's at. You really kind of have to go by what you're hearing when you're covering. But I think it's really just with this now, I'm curious, where is USC? Because it seems like Lincoln Riley, a lot of times he can say the right things sometimes. Sometimes he also doesn't, but he says all the right things sometimes. And I think that does, give people that sense of encouragement. It's all right, we're feeling good. Then we actually get to the games. Then we're wait, what's going on? So I'm just wondering, is this going to just kind of turn out into some of those other programs that we've seen kind of just collapse, and then have ultimately, I'm not saying he's going to get fired, but I'm just wondering, is it going to be where it seems like he loses the locker room and then just guys aren't motivated or just whatever, and then ultimately, it has just led to the coach getting pushed down. The most notable examples this year are James Franklin, Penn State, Billy Napier at Florida State, and the latest addition to the list, Brian Kelly at LSU. So I'm just wondering, even if Lincoln Riley doesn't get fired, which it doesn't seem like at the moment, could something like that happen because of just what's been going on, just with the results and kind of how USC kind of plays just very streaky, and then just sometimes just kind of not always so confident because of just sometimes the plays that are called and just how just the games kind of go, even whether it's a win or a loss.
So I'm not confident. And I wish I was. And I love Greengrass in the chat because he keeps saying, chill out, guys. You're going to win by 3 touchdowns. And, on paper, Greengrass, I agree with you. This is a team that has the talent to beat Nebraska by 3 touchdowns. And, on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. And there's a very clear strategic path forward for this team to go in and do that. So, as a fan who I'm sure watched USC play Notre Dame a couple weeks ago and saw all the talent on that team, and who watches probably a good bit of USC football other than that, it seems like I can see how you would come to that conclusion. But we just have to remember that USC lost to Maryland last year in Maryland, and it was their only conference win. Like, there's no world in which USC was a worse team than Maryland last year. And, last year they had more holes on the roster, and they didn't have, Miller Moss played kind of below expectations, and Maava wasn't ready to start. But they still had a lot of talent on that roster, and they lost to Maryland. Like, there's really nothing is impossible for this team in the wrong direction, unfortunately. And Jeff said in the chat also that he would be confident if, USC was playing this game at home. And I agree. I think, I confidently predicted 2-score win in this game if USC was playing at the Coliseum, but they're not. And they're playing in a stadium that's going to be full. They've smartly, I think this is really smart by Nebraska, they decided months ago that they were going to make this game the blackout, and that they were going to make, their special jersey game, and, that they were going to give just fans extra incentive to be really rowdy and be really excited, because that's going to make a difference, because this team can't seem to pull it together on the road against teams that are much worse than them. It's not Notre Dame is not the problem. Like, yes, the Notre Dame loss is disappointing. Yes, we always want to win that game in a big rivalry game, especially when Notre Dame is making as many mistakes as they are. But the problem is Illinois, because, folks, Illinois is not a good football team. They just got very thoroughly dominated by Washington in Seattle. They're not good. They have 3 conference losses. And again, like this game, there was very clear and obvious reasons why we should have gone in and won that game. The Illinois offensive line is not good. Luke Altmaier can't really run the football. Like, the Illinois defense had just had 60 put up on them by Indiana. Like, there are obvious holes on that roster. And, you can throw out, food poisoning, and like there are other excuses that you could make. But the fact of the matter is that, even with all of that happening, USC had the talent to win that game, and they couldn't get it done. And a lot of it was coaching issues. And, and so that's why I'm not confident now. With all of that said, I would love to be proven wrong. I would love for this to be the game that Lincoln Riley finally changes the narrative, that Danton Lynn changes the narrative, that this whole team changes the narrative, that they go in and they take Nebraska's fans out of it early, and, they play 4 quarters of dominant football. And, all of those perceived strengths that I see USC having on paper, they all play out. Like, I would love to see that. And, if that happens, I will give USC plenty of credit, because I think that it's not like, it's easy to win on the road in college football, and it's easy to go win in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it's not like, this is a Scott Frost-led Nebraska team. Like, yes, they're better. Yes, they have obvious strengths. I've laid some of those out. They have a good secondary. They have a great special teams. But it's still, like I said, there's still very obvious weaknesses. And so it's not like I'm saying that it should be easy to go win this game. What I am saying is USC has the talent to do it, and it's very clear. And USC needs to be able to do hard things. And that's the thing, is that USC will, and they need to take care of the teams that are good but not great. And that's what they haven't done the past couple of years. They've had a couple of real clunkers, like against Maryland. But, the majority of the games that have been the really frustrating losses have been the Minnesotas and, of the world, and all of those teams. So Nebraska this year is kind of like a Minnesota last year. Like, it's going to be hostile, and it's at a point in the season where USC has a lot of pressure on them. Nebraska's kind of playing with house money because they already made a bowl, and that's, worth celebrating in Lincoln. And, they probably have another 2 wins on their schedule. So it's going to be another improvement for Matt Rule. Like, it's not as if if they lose this game, it's not as if, the season is lost and everyone's going to, want Matt Rule to be fired. And, the bar is on the floor for Nebraska. So as long as they win a couple more games, they're going to be fine. So they're kind of playing with house money at this point. They don't have all this pressure on them. USC has all the pressure on them if they want to perform up to the program standard and compete for the playoff to win this football game. So, and to change the narrative, like I said. So, They need to go and handle business.
All right. Predictions just around the corner, but before that, give me a player or two you're really looking at as someone on USC you really are counting on to step up or to handle a particular matchup, assignment, responsibility in this very important road game. Just one or two Trojans that you're really looking to as, hey, I need you to be a dude. I need you to step up. I need you to, rise up in this nationally televised game in this important moment for the Trojans. Like, who becomes a leader by example? Who steps into that limelight and really takes charge of this game? Who's someone that you're pinpointing? Crash first, Ethan second.
I think I'd really see someone on the really kind of, I guess, I'm going to cheat a little bit, Matt, and just say kind of I really want to see just the defensive line as a whole step up. But if you had to make me pick someone, I'd have to see Braylon Shelby step up and really just, have a dominant game, just because of just how crucial I think it is to shutting down Dylan Raiola early on. I think just the whole line is just crucial. But I think Braylon Shelby, if I'm going to have to be stuck with one or two, I'm going to highlight him because I think he's a leader on this team. He's been around the program for a while, and he's played in some big games and has won some of them. So I think he's got to be the one who's got to step up to his fellow linemen and say, guys, we got to shut this guy down. It's on us to do our jobs and get this and just start this game off and just really rattle them early and make them uncomfortable, especially since we're going into their stadium. So I think Braylon Shelby and the defensive line are kind of the key players I'm looking at to really make sure USC has a shot at winning this game.
Well, I want to give Slap Happy a lot of the credit because he said Makai Lemon's name about 6 times in the chat in a row. And that's kind of the line I was thinking. I'm going to do, like it says on a lot of depth charts and do the or. So I would say Makai Lemon or Jacoby Lane. I'll take either one of them. Just one of them needs to rebound from last week. And, there's been a lot of chatter on Twitter, and yes, Makai Lemon still had 75 yards or something like that. But from what we're used to from Makai Lemon, it was still a down game. He did still get locked up, and he obviously had that one big mistake on the fumble. So yes, it's not like he was held to no catches or 2 catches for 10 yards or something like that. But by his standards, it was a down game. So I want to see him rebound. I also want to see, and if not him, then Jacoby Lane. Jacoby Lane was getting open last week, but he was dropping the football a lot. So if one of them can clean that up, if Makai Lemon can be dominant and kind of, assert himself against the secondary and, because Mayava's going to need open receivers. That's what's going to make him comfortable in this environment. He's going to need somebody who he can count on to consistently get open. And if, things start to get stressful, he can have his number one guy. So I don't think it has to be either one of them specifically. Like, I would take either one, but one of the two. I think Makai Lemon is especially would be really great to see. And then, it's kind of an interesting pick. It's kind of an out there pick, but I'm going to take Killian O'Connor because it looks like he's going to play. It's going to be a really loud environment, and he's going to be probably knocking off a little bit of rust, and he needs to be in sync with Mayava. He needs to, kind of be a leader on that offensive line, help them communicate well with so much noise, and just, keep that entire offense, this communication flowing really well. So, and I have a lot of confidence in Killian O'Connor. He played well before he got hurt. So it's not as though I'm calling him out because I feel like he played poorly. I just think that if he plays really well and doesn't have any rust, that could be really to USC's benefit.
Yeah, I did say earlier it's a defensive line game, but I do have to say, and Jeff Rodriguez is really pounding home this point, and I agree with him. This is not a player. This is a coach. Rob Ryan. We're at the end of our show, so we can't really go into a full-length discourse on Rob Ryan, but it's certainly worth mentioning that this defensive coaching staff at USC, with Danton Lynn as coordinator, Eric Henderson, woof woof, on the defensive line, and Doug Belk in the secondary, they all worked really well with Matt Entz and provided a really good product. And just relative to what USC had last year, that defense performed really well. The depth became an issue when Eric Gentry and Anthony Lucas went down, but relative to what USC was working with, that staff did a really good job. if not an excellent job. Certainly, like at least a B plus, if not an A minus last season. And with Rob Ryan, for all the experience that he has, like this defense has not been as good as last year's relative to the talent, relative to the groceries that USC's been able to pull in at the store. It's been a step backward for this defense, and one has to ask, is Rob Ryan the piece of this puzzle that really isn't fitting? Because Matt Entz did a better job with the linebackers, at least to this point. Now we have 5 games left of season. We have 5 games of runway still to go before we call it a season in 2025. Rob Ryan is my pick for this game and really for the month of November. Like, he has to earn his place on this staff. So I really agree with what Jeff Rodriguez is getting at. If we don't see significant, not just performance from the linebackers, but also just the continuity between the front 4 and the linebackers, especially in run support, if that really doesn't emerge on a higher level against Nebraska, and if it doesn't remain part of the formula for this team in November, like, Rob Ryan's got to go. Rob Ryan cannot be retained for 2026. So no final verdicts here, but like this, Rob Ryan should be coaching for his job. He should be on the hot seat entering November. So really, really agree with Jeff Rodriguez, which we usually do here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. All right, end of the line, folks. Prediction time. And just to kind of set the scene here, USC a 6-point favorite. Let's remind everybody, USC was a 6.5-point favorite against Illinois. We all know how that one turned out. And the Notre Dame game, USC was a 9.5-point dog. Notre Dame wins by 10 and covers. So, like, if you've been betting against USC, you have usually cashed tickets this season relative to the spread. Now, USC covered against Michigan, of course, but usually, like, USC was favored by 17.5 against Michigan State, won by 14. USC was favored by 20.5 against Purdue, won by 13. So, USC has not been covering spreads, and I know we don't focus on covering spreads. Like, again, give me the ugliest 17-16 win, I'll take it, especially if no one gets injured. But USC minus the 6 against Nebraska. Let's give a prediction relative to the spread and, of course, money line as well. Crash first, Ethan second.
So, Matt, I think it's going to be I'm thinking about 20s. I got this one. I think USC is going to find a way to squeak it out, but I think it's going to be just kind of I don't want to say ugly, but it's going to just be, down to the wire, last possession, just gritty game. So I think USC is going to win this one. We're going 24-23, I think, is about where it's going to be. So that's kind of where I'm feeling. I don't think the Trojans cover, especially just with how they've been. So I'm thinking it's going to be, kind of mid-20s. It's just something that's just, going to just be really back and forth. Just kind of a street fight. Just really, I think it's going to be an interesting game, but I'm just not sure. I think USC finds a way to win. I'm confident in that, but I'm not confident in their ability to cover the spread.
So I really like Bob's prediction, 34-28. I was thinking 34-27, so we're kind of really aligned here. I don't think it's going to be the kind of 34-27 where USC has to go down and score a game-winning touchdown. I think it's going to be more like, USC's leading pretty consistently, but they're just not putting Nebraska away, because I feel like that's what we've seen a lot of from this team. So, it's going to be like Nebraska kicking a field goal with a minute and a half left in the game to cut the lead to 7, and then, trying to do the onside kick and not doing it successfully. Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking, that sort of 34-27. Like, I think, it'll be just close enough the whole game for us all to be way more stressed out than we should be, but, not quite close enough that, we're really ever in, a super big doubt about this game. So that I'm thinking 34-27. I think it's going to be a little bit more high scoring than Crash does, just because I don't really I think that, USC is, with the balanced offense that they have, with the offensive line that they have, I think that they're going to find a way to put points on the board. I just worry that, and I think I have the right to, that, this defensive game plan is not going to be great, and that we're going to let Emmett Johnson run all over us. So until I see that taken care of, I'm going to be nervous about it. So that's why I think, Nebraska is also going to be able to put up points. But, I think 34-27 somewhat comfortably is a pretty fair and safe prediction for how this USC team and this Nebraska team have fared in the past.
Yeah, so, I don't have a lot of confidence in USC, but I don't think Nebraska is especially good. Like, I can't take Nebraska outright. So I'm going to take USC to win. But I'm definitely taking Nebraska plus the 6. Like, again, if you've been betting against USC on the spread, you've been cashing far more often than not this season. So you got to ride that, and you got to just say, Lincoln Riley, Danton Lynn, prove it. Rob Ryan, too. Prove it. Prove it. You can go into enemy Big Ten territory at night. You can just, put the boot to the throat. We'd love to see that, but the fact that this just doesn't happen is why it's hard to trust that is going to be the outcome. So I do think that USC scores. Nebraska's going to score plenty, to keep the game within reach. Give me USC 34, Nebraska 31. Taking Nebraska plus the 6, but USC comes out with the victory. All right, so because there's a game, we have a Sunday show this coming Sunday, November 2nd, 5 p.m. in LA, and the rest of the West, 8 p.m. In the East. And then, of course, next week we have our regular Tuesday show. And, next week it's Northwestern on a Friday night. Won't be competing with a Dodger World Series game this time. Last year it was the Rutgers game starting right when Freddie Freeman did his thing against the Yankees. But so no World Series conflict this time for a Friday night special. That's going to be against Northwestern. But we'll be back here next Tuesday for our Northwestern preview show. But Sunday at 5 in LA, it's our Nebraska review show. And we remind you, go to vocfb.com/shop. Get a USC cap. Like, we want to hear from our loyal viewers, listeners, that you've gotten some nice, attractive USC merch. It helps us. It helps the channel. The other way you can help us, get your knife and fork for some bonus cuts. Tuck in and get the exclusive insider access to the special videos. They're about 15 to 20 minutes usually, so they're not extremely long. They're bite-sized, but really choice fillets. Let me tell you. All right, that Ethan and Crashlet Collier have been producing. We're going to put a few more in the can this week, so you get that at the middle Heisman tier or the top national champion tier. And once again, your memberships help ourselves, the three of us, and also the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. So for Crashlet Collier and Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. We'll see you Sunday. Thanks for watching, and fight on here at the Voice of College Football.